Okay, so what are some of the other strategies that you think kind of you guys, the founders, nailed in this 0 to 1 million scaling period that really set you guys up for that ability to scale much further?
So I think we did, again, I'll just double back to how many customer conversations we were having, because I think this is really overlooked often. And I think that the other thing that we really focused on was going outbound early and in a really big way. And so we were doing a ton of really hacky sort of early stage stuff to try to say, like, how can we get really creative? And we would do stuff like, we would look at lists of conferences that were going on. We didn't have the money to go to all these conferences or the time or the resources or the people, but we would look at the list of people and we would email all the companies we knew were there. And we'd say, hey, we're at this conference. You want to meet up for a coffee? And then they would say, oh yeah, sure, I'm here. And then we would say, oh, the next day we'd say, oh, shoot, sorry, I missed you. Let's set up 30 minutes on a Zoom call.
Yeah.
Right. And try to do a lot of really creative sort of hacky things that we could do within the market that we wanted to have as many conversations as possible. And I think a lot of startups really lean toward the sort of investor intros or personal connections. And that's great. And you need to do that as well. But it's really hard to get an honest answer from someone who your VC introduces you to.
Yeah.
So as much as and at some point, your inbound or your advisor intros are going to hit a ceiling, right? You can't just infinitely scale that. So building the DNA and the muscle within your sales team from day one of we're going to go after the companies that we want to talk to is an incredibly valuable practice.
Awesome. And then the flip side of that, if you were doing this all again, what's one thing that you might have done differently in that early stage with Sendoso?
It's hard with hindsight to be too critical. I think there's a couple things that we could have done better. One was probably I can't think of anything, to be honest with you.
Honestly, that's great. And of course, you manage. I'm sure if it had all fallen apart right then and there, you'd have plenty to say about what could have gone better. But as a company that has managed to scale, you obviously did build the really solid foundation that you needed. So that's great. Let's talk about that next phase of scaling. So you had your solid $1 million base. You had lots of customers. How did you shift the strategy in order to make that bigger jump of 1 to 10 million?
Yeah. So the 1 to 10 million sort of phase is incredibly interesting for a lot of reasons. Whatever you've done to get you from 0 to 1 is likely not going to work at 1 to 10, simply from the calculus of how you get to $1 million in terms of the AE sort of quota, right? $1 million is 1 or 2 reps closing for probably just under a year, right? Between 6 months and a year of business. 10 million is 10 reps carrying $1 million, give or take, right? 12 carrying 850 or 800, whatever it is. It's something like that. So what 1 or 2 sales reps can do is great. And you get to that point where you hit $1 million, you've proven ideally by then that the product can be sold to a defined market. Now, that doesn't necessarily tell you that you have the ability to go and ramp 8 other AEs at that point in time. And so the mistake that a lot of companies made, and something that we had to sort of work through and figure out at the space as well, is the wrong thing to do is to go hire those other 8 AEs and go tell your board, hey, we've got 10 million in quota capacity this year, no problem, 2 reps hit, so we know we can go do it with 8, right? You need to add those reps in the same way that you sort of decide to bring the first rep on, which is you look at some data and you have some assumptions and you say, okay, we have a reason to believe we can bring 1 sales rep. Well, for some reason, a lot of companies throw out that logic when they go to scale from 1 to 10, and they forget that you probably should hire those reps gradually over time and understand what is working and look at the other inputs that go into making a sales rep successful. So an obvious one is lead flow, right? Demand gen, marketing, sales development support, right? The outbound thing we talked about.
Yeah.
If you have 2 sales reps and they're doing, and let's say half their meetings are coming from inbound, right? And you have maybe 1 SDR, or the reps are doing some outbound. Well, they're still getting half their meetings from inbound. So if you go and hire 10 other reps, all of a sudden, instead of your 2 reps getting 10 meetings a month inbound, each of your sales reps is getting 1, and they're all going to fall short unless you're able to supplement that with your outbound. So understanding how all of those factors go into each additional sort of head that you're adding, and doing that in a way where it's over time and you can quickly look back at the plan and sort of course correct or change trajectory or scale faster, maybe, if everything is working, right? But a lot of companies think that sales reps are the answer to more revenue. That's half the battle. But if they don't have the right amount of marketing, if they don't have the right amount of sales development, and if there isn't that demand gen process to say, hey, if we go add another $1 million in quota capacity, we also believe we can go add another 10 million in pipeline, because that's realistically what each rep's going to need.
Yeah.
And so that's where it starts to break. And that's the sort of dials and the levers that you're pulling from that 1 to 10 process is, what does this really look like as we scale?